At Morixa Tales, we believe in the power of storytelling. Our scripts weave together deep emotions and dramatic turns to deliver justice where it is most needed. Experience captivating mysteries where the truth eventually shines through, leaving a lasting impact on your heart and mind.
My sister called me at 7:15 in the morning. Mom died last night. The funeral is Friday. She left everything to me. You get nothing. I just smiled, because Mom was standing right next to me. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Before we dive in, do us a quick favor, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your location. We're curious to see how far our community reaches. Just a heads up, this story blends fiction with real-world themes for educational purposes. Names and settings are fictional, and any resemblance to actual people or places is pure coincidence. But the lessons, those are 100% true. The phone rang at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in January, and I almost didn't answer it. I was standing in my kitchen in Cherry Creek, balancing a travel mug of coffee in one hand and my work bag in the other, already running 5 minutes behind schedule. The Denver skyline glowed pale gold through my window, the kind of crisp winter morning that makes you forget how cold it actually is outside. I had a client presentation at 9. I had no time for distractions, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. Natalie. My older sister never called this early. She barely called at all anymore. I set down the mug and swiped to answer, my stomach already tightening with some instinct I couldn't name. Natalie. Her voice came through flat and clipped, like she was reading from a script. Rebecca, I need you to listen carefully. Mom passed away last night. The words didn't land right away. They hovered in the air between us, impossible and wrong. I felt my breath catch my knees go soft. What? She's gone, Natalie said, and there was something oddly controlled in her tone, something rehearsed. It happened around midnight at Pinewood. The staff called me an hour ago. I've already started making arrangements. I sank into the chair by the counter, my bag sliding off my shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Our mother, Dorothy, was 63 years old. She'd been living in a senior care facility for nearly a year after being diagnosed with early-onset cognitive decline. I'd visited her just 3 days ago. She'd seemed tired, distant, but not dying, not gone. I don't understand, I managed. She was fine on Saturday. What happened? Her heart, they think. It was sudden. Natalie's voice softened just slightly, but it still felt off, like she was performing grief rather than living it. The funeral is Friday. I'm handling everything. The will is straightforward. She left everything to me. I'm calling to let you know as a courtesy, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't make this difficult. The words hit like a slap. Make it difficult, Natalie. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the estate, the money, the property. It's all mine, Rebecca. Mom made her wishes very clear. If you're thinking about contesting anything, don't. You'll lose, and you'll only make this uglier than it needs to be. I stared at the countertop, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't grief. This wasn't shock. This was a business transaction. I haven't even processed that she's gone, and you're already talking about money. I'm being practical, Natalie said coolly. The funeral is Friday at 10, Heritage Memorial Chapel. You're welcome to come, but I'd prefer if you kept things civil. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice dropped to something almost threatening. Don't cause a scene, Rebecca. I mean it. Then she hung up. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind spinning. Something was wrong. Everything about that call was wrong. Natalie's tone, her timing, the way she'd framed our mother's passing like a hostile takeover. And then a thought cut through the fog, sharp and clear. I needed to hear it from someone else. I needed proof. I pulled up the number for Pinewood Senior Living and called, my hands shaking as I pressed the phone back to my ear. A cheerful voice answered after 2 rings. Pinewood Senior Living, this is Lisa speaking. How can I help you? Hi, this is Rebecca Mitchell. My mother is Dorothy Mitchell in room 214. I just received a call that she passed away last night, and I wanted to confirm. I'm sorry, Lisa interrupted gently, but there must be some mistake. Dorothy's right here. I just checked on her 20 minutes ago. She's having breakfast in the common room. The world tilted. "She's alive," I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Would you like me to transfer you to her floor, or—" I hung up before she could finish. My mother was alive. Natalie had lied. Not a mistake, not a miscommunication. A lie. A deliberate, calculated lie about our mother being gone, complete with a funeral date and threats about an inheritance that didn't exist. I sat there staring at nothing, trying to piece together what was happening. Natalie had power of attorney over Mom's care. She'd moved her into Pinewood almost a year ago, right after the dementia diagnosis. She'd been managing Mom's finances, her medical decisions, everything. And now she was pretending Mom was gone. Why the answer came fast and cold. Money, control. Something Natalie wanted badly enough to fake a death and threaten her own sister. I thought about the last time I'd seen Natalie. 3 months ago, maybe longer. We'd grown distant over the years, our relationship polite but strained, like two people who'd once been close but couldn't remember why. But she'd always been my big sister, the one who used to protect me. I thought about the scar on her right forearm, the one she got when we were kids. I was 8 years old, and we'd gone to Big Thompson River near Estes Park for a summer day trip. I'd slipped on the rocks and fallen into the current, and Natalie had jumped in after me without hesitation. She'd pulled me to shore, her arm torn open from the rocks, blood streaking down to her wrist. The paramedics had come. The local paper had called her a hero. Teen saves sister from drowning. I'd never forgotten that day. I'd never forgotten that she'd risked everything to save me. And now, sitting in my kitchen with my cold coffee and my shattered morning, I couldn't reconcile the girl who'd saved my life with the woman who'd just lied about our mother's passing. I didn't have time to fall apart. I had 72 hours before whatever Natalie was planning went into motion. I needed help. I needed someone who knew how to fight this kind of fight. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name a colleague had given me months ago, back when I'd first started worrying about Mom's situation. Thomas Garrett, a family law attorney who specialized in elder care disputes. He answered on the third ring. Garrett and Associates. "Mr. Garrett, my name is Rebecca Mitchell. I need your help. My sister just told me our mother is gone, but she's not. She's alive, and I think my sister is trying to steal everything she has." There was a pause, then calm and steady. "Tell me everything." I did. I told him about the call, about Natalie's power of attorney, about the dementia diagnosis that had come on so suddenly it never quite made sense, about the money I suspected was being moved, about the funeral that wasn't real and the will that didn't exist yet. When I finished, Thomas spoke carefully. "This sounds like financial exploitation, possibly elder abuse. I'm going to connect you with someone who can investigate. Her name is Jennifer Blake. She's a private investigator and she's very good. Can you meet with both of us today?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Anything. 2 o'clock, my office. Bring any documents you have, anything related to your mother's care or finances." "I will, thank you." I hung up and sat back in my chair, my mind already racing. I thought about Natalie's voice on the phone, the coldness, the threats, the desperation underneath it all. And I thought about my husband Ryan, still asleep upstairs. He'd gotten back late last night from a business trip, exhausted and distant smelling, faintly of something I couldn't place. Perfume, maybe, or just the recycled air of too many airports. I pushed the thought away. I couldn't afford to be paranoid. Not now. I had one focus and one focus only. I had 72 hours to find out what my sister was hiding, and why she wanted everyone to think our mother was gone. By 6 o'clock that evening, the sky over Denver had turned the color of bruised plums, and I was driving east toward Pinewood Senior, living with my hands gripping the wheel too tight. The meeting with Thomas Garrett had been efficient and sobering. He'd taken notes, asked careful questions, and promised to start pulling records by morning. Jennifer Blake, the private investigator he'd brought in, had been equally direct. She'd need access to financial statements, medical files, anything that could show a pattern. I'd signed release forms, handed over what little I had, and left his office feeling like I'd just declared war on my own family. Now, as I pulled into the parking lot of the long brick building where my mother lived, I felt the weight of it settle over me like snow. Pinewood Senior Living looked pleasant enough from the outside. Neat landscaping, warm lights glowing through the windows, a sign out front that promised compassionate care in a home-like setting. But I knew better. This wasn't home. It was a place where people went when their families couldn't care for them anymore, or wouldn't. I signed in at the front desk, clipped on a visitor badge, and walked down the long corridor toward room 214. The air smelled like disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. A television blared from the common room. Somewhere down the hall, someone was coughing. When I reached Mom's room, the door was half open. I knocked lightly and stepped inside. She was sitting in a chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at nothing. The room was small and sterile. A single bed with a pale blue blanket, a nightstand, a dresser with a small television on top. That was it. No photographs on the walls, no flowers on the sill, no books or knitting or any of the things that used to fill her house. It looked like a room where no one really lived. "Mom," I said softly, crossing to her side. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the darkening sky beyond the glass, her expression blank and distant. I knelt beside her chair and took her hand. It was cool and thin, the skin papery beneath my fingers. "Mom, it's me. It's Rebecca." Nothing, not even a flicker. A nurse appeared in the doorway, young and tired-looking, with a badge that read, "Lisa." She smiled apologetically. "She has good days and bad days. Today's been pretty quiet." "Does she ever talk?" I asked, my voice tight. "Not much. Your sister handles all the arrangements, so I don't always know what's going on with her care, but we make sure she's comfortable." Lisa hesitated, then added gently, "I'm sorry. I know this is hard." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lisa left, and I stayed there, kneeling beside my mother, holding her hand and trying not to cry. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. A year ago, Mom had been sharp active, living independently in the house where I'd grown up. Then came the diagnosis. Early onset cognitive decline, the doctors had said. Natalie had insisted we move her somewhere safe, somewhere with professionals who could manage her needs. I'd been hesitant, but Natalie had been adamant. She had power of attorney. She'd made the decision, and I'd let her. Now, looking at the empty walls and the stranger sitting beside me, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. I squeezed Mom's hand, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, standing on the rocks at Big Thompson River, the summer sun hot on my shoulders. It had been one of those perfect Colorado days, the kind you remember your whole life. We'd driven up to Estes Park for a picnic, just the four of us. Mom and Dad sitting on a blanket near the water, Natalie and me wading into the shallows, laughing and splashing each other, daring each other to go deeper. Natalie had always been braver than me. She was 13 that summer, tall and confident and fearless. I'd followed her everywhere, desperate to keep up, desperate to be like her. "Come on, Rebecca," she'd called, standing on a flat rock in the middle of the current. "It's not that deep." I'd climbed up after her, my bare feet slipping on the wet stone, my heart pounding with excitement and fear. The water rushed around us, cold and fast, pulling at my ankles. I'd reached for her hand, grinning, feeling like the bravest kid in the world, and then my foot slipped. I remember the shock of it, the way the world tilted sideways, the cold water closing over my head, filling my mouth, my lungs. I remember thrashing, trying to find the surface, but the current was too strong. It dragged me under, spun me around, slammed me into rocks I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was drowning, and I knew it. Then there were hands, strong hands grabbing my arm, my shirt pulling me up. I broke the surface, gasping, choking, and Natalie was there, her face terrified and determined, dragging me toward the shore. "I've got you," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "Don't let go." I clung to her, sobbing and coughing, and she pulled me through the current until we reached the shallows. She hauled me onto the rocks and collapsed beside me, both of us shaking and drenched. That's when I saw the blood. Her right arm was torn open from elbow to wrist, a deep gash from where she'd hit the rocks, pulling me out. She didn't even seem to notice. She just held me, her arms wrapped around me, whispering, "You're okay, you're okay." Mom and Dad came running. Someone called for help. An ambulance arrived. They stitched Natalie's arm up at the clinic in town, 14 stitches that left a scar she'd carry forever. The local paper ran a story the next day. "Teen hero saves sister from drowning." There was a picture of Natalie with her arm bandaged, smiling shyly at the camera. She'd been embarrassed by the attention, but I'd been so proud of her, so grateful. She was my hero, my big sister who'd saved my life without a second thought. I blinked, and I was back in the nursing home, sitting on the cold linoleum floor holding my mother's hand. The memory faded, but the weight of it stayed. That scar was still there. I'd seen it just a few months ago, a pale line running down Natalie's forearm, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A permanent reminder of the day she'd risked everything to save me. And now here I was, sitting in this empty room, wondering how the girl who'd pulled me from the river could be the same woman who'd lied about our mother's passing, who'd threatened me over an inheritance that didn't exist, who'd taken everything from the woman who'd raised us both. I looked at Mom, her vacant eyes staring at nothing, and I felt something crack inside me. "What happened to her, Mom?" I whispered. "What happened to my sister?" She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. But I stayed there a while longer, holding her hand, remembering the river and the scar and the girl who used to be a hero. When I finally left Pinewood that night, the temperature had dropped and my breath came out in clouds. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the building, thinking about everything I'd lost without even realizing it. The scar on Natalie's right forearm had always reminded me that she'd once saved my life. Now I wondered what happened to that girl. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's vacant stare and Natalie's face in the river water streaming down her cheeks. By 9 o'clock Wednesday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a pounding headache, staring at my phone and willing it to ring. Jennifer Blake had promised preliminary findings by morning. I needed something solid, something that would make sense of the last 2 days. 75 words. When the call finally came, I answered before the first ring finished. "Rebecca, it's Jennifer. Do you have a few minutes? I need to walk you through what I've found." Her voice was calm, but carried an edge that made my stomach drop. "Yes, tell me everything." "I'm going to conference in Thomas Garrett as well." There was a pause, clicks, and then Thomas's steady voice came through. "Rebecca, good morning. Whatever Jennifer's about to share, we're going to handle this the right way. 155 total." Jennifer didn't waste time. "I've been pulling financial records for your mother, Dorothy Mitchell, for the past 12 months. What I found is extensive and deeply troubling. In the last 10 months alone, $340,000 has disappeared from her accounts." The number hit me like a fist to the chest. I couldn't speak. $340,000, Thomas repeated sharply. "That's not mismanagement, that's systematic exploitation." "Exactly," Jennifer confirmed. "The withdrawals started small, a few thousand here and there, but over the last 6 months they escalated dramatically. Large wire transfers to accounts. I'm still tracing cash withdrawals from ATMs across Denver luxury purchases. Whoever's doing this got bolder as time went on." I finally found my voice rough and shaking. "Natalie, she has power of attorney. She controls all of Mom's finances." "That's my working assessment," Jennifer said. "But there's more. Your mother's cabin near Estes Park was sold 8 months ago to a shell company for $400,000. $400,000, I echoed. "That cabin's worth at least 6. We vacationed there every summer when I was growing up." "I know. It was deliberately undervalued. The buyer is a limited liability company registered in Delaware with no public ownership records. Classic money laundering setup. I'm working on tracing it, but it takes time." I pressed my fingers to my temples. Mom's savings, her beloved cabin, everything stolen. And Natalie had held all the keys. 425 total. "There's something else." Jennifer continued, her tone shifting lower. "I've been investigating Natalie's personal finances to understand motive. Rebecca, your sister, is in serious trouble. She owes money to a man named Marcus Volkov. Do you know that name?" "No. Who is he?" "He runs an underground lending operation here in Denver. Not legitimate. He loans money to people who can't get it through traditional channels and charges interest rates of 20 to 30% compounded monthly." Thomas made a low sound of disgust. "Loan sharking, that's organized crime." "It is, Jennifer agreed grimly. And Natalie is into him deep. She currently owes $180,000. The debt's been accumulating for about 3 years. She initially borrowed $50,000 to cover business shortfalls. With Volkov's compounding rates, it ballooned to where it is now. I stared at my coffee mug. Why would she go to someone like that? Real estate market crash a few years back. She lost major clients, income dried up, but she was still trying to maintain her lifestyle. Traditional banks refused her credit, so she turned to Volkov. And now she's stealing from our mother to cover the debt. I said slowly, pieces clicking together. That's the theory, and here's the time pressure. Volkov's deadline for full payment is January 31st, less than 3 weeks from now. If she doesn't pay, there will be serious consequences. He has a reputation in Denver for collecting what he's owed one way or another. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just greed. It was survival. Natalie had backed herself into a corner and was willing to destroy everything to escape. 720 total, one more thing, Jennifer said. I found a connection to Dr. Robert Lawson, the physician at Pinewood who diagnosed your mother with cognitive decline. He and Natalie went to college together, University of Colorado at Boulder. Same graduating class, same social circles. They've known each other for over 15 years. Thomas's voice hardened. That's a red flag. If Lawson's diagnosis was falsified or exaggerated to justify seizing control of your mother's finances, then we're looking at coordinated fraud. Medical fraud? I whispered. And elder abuse. Exactly, Thomas said. I'm meeting with the district attorney's office this afternoon. What Jennifer's uncovered is more than enough to open a criminal investigation. I should have felt relief. But I only felt hollow. 880 total, Rebecca. Jennifer said carefully, there's one more thing I need to ask you about. I found some transactions in your mother's accounts that were authorized from an IP address I wasn't expecting. Some of the larger transfers in the last 3 months were initiated through online banking. The IP address traces back to a residential location in Denver, in the Cherry Creek area. My blood turned to ice. Cherry Creek, that's where I live. I know, Jennifer said quietly. I need another day to confirm all the details, but several transactions were authorized from an IP address registered to your home address. The words hung in the air. My home. My address. The townhouse I shared with my husband. That's not possible. I said, though the ground was shifting beneath me. I didn't authorize anything. I don't have access to those accounts. I'm not suggesting you did, Jennifer said quickly, but someone in your household does, someone who's been using your internet connection. Ryan, my husband, the business trips, the distance, the way he deflected every time I mentioned Mom. Ryan, I whispered. I don't have proof yet, Jennifer said, but does your husband have any connection to Natalie? No, I said immediately. They barely know each other. We see her twice a year. There's no reason. But doubt was seeping in. The late nights, the absences, the evasions. Rebecca, Thomas said firmly, don't confront anyone yet. Don't tip your hand. We need to gather everything before we move. Understood. Yes, I managed feeling like I was drowning with no one to save me. I'll call when I know more. Jennifer promised. The line went dead. 200 total. I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by silence and wreckage. $340,000. A loan shark named Marcus Volkov, a doctor who might have lied, and my husband's name tied to transactions I couldn't explain. I thought about the scar on Natalie's forearm, about the brave girl who jumped into a river to save me, and the desperate woman she'd become. What happened to you, Natalie? And who else did you drag down with you? That afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about the IP address, my home, my internet connection, my husband's possible involvement in everything Natalie had done. But beneath the shock and the questions, another worry gnawed at me. I hadn't checked on my mother since yesterday evening. By 2 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Pinewood. Lisa answered after 3 rings, her voice bright and professional. Pinewood Senior Living, this is Lisa. Hi, Lisa. It's Rebecca Mitchell. I'm calling to check on my mother, Dorothy. Is she doing okay today? There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "Oh, Rebecca. Actually, your sister picked her up this morning around 11. She said they were going on a family outing for the afternoon. I assumed you knew." My stomach dropped. "A family outing? Natalie took her out of the facility." "Yes, ma'am. She had all the proper authorization, power of attorney paperwork. She said they'd be back by dinner time." I gripped the phone tighter. Did my mother seem okay? Was she alert? Did she say anything? "She seemed quiet like usual. Your sister was very attentive, though. Helped her into the car, made sure she was comfortable." I thanked Lisa and hung up my hands, shaking. Natalie had taken Mom out of Pinewood. Natalie, who visited maybe once a month. Natalie, who'd spent the last year moving money and selling property and lying about everything. Natalie, who owed a dangerous man $180,000 and had less than 3 weeks to pay him. And now she had our mother alone, somewhere away from witnesses, away from the safety of the facility. I immediately called Natalie's cell phone. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. "This is Natalie. Leave a message." I tried again and again, each time voicemail. I tried her office number, no answer. I pulled up her contact information and called every number I had for her. Nothing. It was like she disappeared off the face of the earth and she'd taken our mother with her. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was she running? Was she planning to take Mom somewhere? Volkov's people couldn't find them? Or was she doing something worse? Something I didn't want to imagine. I grabbed my keys and drove home through Denver traffic, my heart hammering the entire way. When I pulled into the driveway of our townhouse in Cherry Creek, Ryan's car wasn't there. Still gone. Still on whatever business trip he'd claimed he was taking. I tried calling him too. It went straight to voicemail. I was completely alone. Inside the house felt too quiet, too empty. I paced from room to room, checking my phone every 30 seconds, willing it to ring. Willing Natalie to call back. Willing someone to tell me everything was fine and I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I wasn't overreacting. Something was very wrong. Natalie had our mother and I had no idea where they were or what was happening. The afternoon crawled by like torture. 3 o'clock became 4. 4 became 5. The January sun set early and darkness fell over Denver. I stood at my kitchen window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, my phone clutched in my hand. Lisa had said Natalie promised to have Mom back by dinner time. Dinner time had come and gone. I called Pinewood again at 6:30. "Has my mother been returned yet?" "No, ma'am," a different staff member said. "We haven't seen her or your sister. Should we be concerned?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I honestly don't know." I hung up and stared at my phone, feeling helpless and terrified. At 7 o'clock, my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. Not Natalie's, not Ryan's, not Pinewood. Just a local Denver number I didn't recognize. I answered immediately, my voice cracking. "Hello." For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard breathing, soft, labored, like someone trying to stay quiet. "Hello," I said again, louder. "Who is this?" Then came the voice. Barely a whisper, so faint I had to press the phone hard against my ear to hear it. "Rebecca." My breath caught. "Who is this?" "Rebecca, it's me." The voice was female, older, trembling. It sounded like my mother. It sounded exactly like my mother's voice, the way she used to sound before the dementia diagnosis, before Pinewood, before everything fell apart. "Mom." I whispered, my heart racing. "Mom, is that you? Where are you?" There was a sound in the background, muffled, indistinct, maybe a door closing, maybe footsteps. I couldn't tell. "Mom, talk to me. Are you okay? Where's Natalie? What's happening?" The voice was so quiet, so strained. I need you to..." Then nothing, just dead air. The line had gone completely silent. Mom. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. The call was still connected, but there was no sound. "Mom, can you hear me?" A rustling noise, movement, then a different sound, sharp and sudden, like the phone being dropped or knocked against something hard, and then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my entire body shaking. I hit redial immediately. The number rang and rang and rang, but no one answered. It just kept ringing into an empty void. I tried again. Same result. I tried a third time, and this time a recorded message played. The number you have dialed is not available. Please try your call again later. I sank onto the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet's phone, still clutched in my trembling hands. That had been my mother's voice. I was almost certain. The tone, the cadence, the way she'd said my name, it was her. But where was she? Why had she whispered? Why had the call cut off so suddenly? My mind spun through terrible scenarios. Natalie had taken her somewhere isolated. Something had gone wrong. Mom had managed to grab a phone call me, but then Natalie had discovered her. Or maybe it wasn't Natalie at all. Maybe Volkov's people had found them. Maybe they were both in danger, or maybe none of that was true. Maybe this was all part of some elaborate plan I couldn't see yet. Maybe Natalie was manipulating me, using Mom's voice, somehow playing psychological games to keep me off balance, while she executed whatever scheme she'd concocted. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I didn't know who to trust. My sister was a liar and a thief. My husband might be involved. And my mother had just called me from an unknown number, whispering like she was in danger before the line went dead. I sat there on my kitchen floor in the dark, listening to the silence of my empty house, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Somewhere out there, my mother was with my sister, or she was alone and afraid, or she was playing a role in something I couldn't begin to understand. That voice on the phone, those whispered words, that abrupt disconnection. Was that really my mother's voice? Or was Natalie playing a more twisted game than I'd ever imagined? I couldn't sit still any longer. An hour after that mysterious call, after trying every number I had and getting nowhere, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me: Natalie. The drive from Cherry Creek to Highlands Ranch took 20 minutes through dark suburban streets. Natalie lived in a tidy neighborhood of townhouses and young families, the kind of place where people washed their cars on Saturday mornings and waved to their neighbors. Her silver sedan sat in the driveway. Lights glowed behind drawn curtains in the front windows. She was home. I parked on the street and walked up to her front door, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I raised my fist and knocked. Hard. It took almost a minute, but finally the door opened. Natalie stood there in jeans and an oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked tired, older than I remembered. There were shadows under her eyes, and her face had a drawn, hollow quality that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen her. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then my eyes dropped to her right forearm, where the sleeve of her sweater had been pushed up to her elbow. The scar was there, pale and thin, running from just below her elbow down toward her wrist. The scar that had once meant heroism and sacrifice. The scar that reminded me she'd saved my life. Now it just made me angry. "Rebecca," she said, her voice clipped and cautious. "What are you doing here?" "Where's Mom?" I said, without preamble. "Where did you take her?" Natalie's expression shifted, became guarded. "What are you talking about? Don't play games with me, Natalie. You took her out of Pinewood this morning. You told the staff you were going on a family outing. Where is she?" "She's fine," Natalie said, but her voice was too smooth, too rehearsed. "She's back at Pinewood. I returned her hours ago." "That's a lie," I called. "They haven't seen her." Natalie's jaw tightened. "Then they made a mistake. Or you misunderstood. Mom is fine, Rebecca. You need to calm down." "Calm down." My voice rose despite myself. "You called me 2 days ago and told me Mom was dead. You planned a fake funeral. You've been stealing her money, selling her property. And now you've taken her somewhere, and I can't reach you, and I just got a call from someone who sounded exactly like Mom, and then the line went dead." I stepped closer. "So don't you dare tell me to calm down." Natalie's face went pale. "You're not making any sense. You sound crazy." "I sound crazy. You're the one who lied about our mother being—" Natalie's phone rang, loud and shrill from somewhere inside the house. She flinched, like she'd been struck. The ringing continued. She didn't move to answer it, just stood there, frozen, her eyes wide. "Aren't you going to get that?" I asked. "It's no one," she said quickly, too quickly. The ringing stopped. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then it started again. Natalie pulled her phone from her pocket with a shaking hand. She glanced at the screen and I saw her face drain of what little color it had left. Her hand trembled as she hit the button to decline the call. "Who was that?" I asked, watching her carefully. "Spam," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. "Natalie, who was that?" She looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something other than defensiveness in her eyes. I saw fear, raw, genuine, bone-deep fear. Not fear of me, fear of whoever was on the other end of that call. The phone rang again, same number. Natalie stared at it like it was a weapon pointed at her chest. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Not until you tell me where Mom is." "I can't." She shook her head, backing away from the door. "You don't understand. You don't know what's happening. Just leave Rebecca. Please." But I'd seen it, that flash of terror in her eyes. "Who's calling you, Natalie? Who are you so afraid of?" "No one. Nothing. You're imagining things." "I know about Marcus Volkov," I said, and watched her entire body go rigid. "I know about the loan. I know you owe him $180,000. I know the deadline is January 31st. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Is that who's calling you? Is he threatening you? Is that why you've been stealing from Mom to pay him back?" "Get out," she said, her voice suddenly sharp and desperate. "Get out of my house. Right now. Tell me where Mom is." "You don't know anything about my life," she shouted, stepping forward and grabbing the edge of the door. "You don't know what I've been dealing with. You don't know what it's like to have everything falling apart and no way to fix it. So just stay out of it, Rebecca. Stay away from me, stay away from Mom, and let me handle this." She slammed the door in my face. I stood there on her doorstep, breathing hard, staring at the closed door. For a long moment, I didn't move. I could hear her voice through the door, muffled but frantic, like she was talking to someone. On the phone, maybe, or to herself. I couldn't tell. Finally, I turned and walked back to my car. My legs felt unsteady, my mind spinning with everything I'd just seen and heard. As I opened my car door, I looked back at the house one more time. Through the front window, past the curtains that hadn't quite closed all the way, I could see Natalie. She was pacing back and forth across her living room, the phone pressed to her ear, one hand gesturing wildly. Even from this distance, I could see the panic in her movements, the fear. She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to whoever had been calling, and she looked terrified. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My sister wasn't just a criminal. She wasn't just a liar and a thief. She was trapped, cornered, running from something that scared her more than losing her family, more than going to prison, more than anything I could threaten her with. Marcus Volkov, the loan shark, the deadline, the consequences. Whatever Natalie was running from it was bigger than me, bigger than both of us. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my mother was missing. I'd barely slept. I spent most of the night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for someone to call. Natalie, Ryan, the police, anyone who could tell me where my mother was. By Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, I was running on coffee and exhaustion when my phone finally rang. Jennifer Blake. I answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." There was a pause on the other end. When Jennifer spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Rebecca, I need you to sit down. I have bad news. Actually, it's 2 pieces of news, and both of them are going to be very hard to hear." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" Jennifer took a breath. "Your husband and your sister are involved with each other, romantically." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung there in the air, impossible and absurd. "What?" I whispered. "I found evidence," Jennifer said gently. "Hotel receipts. Ryan and Natalie checked into the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Denver together 4 times over the past 6 months. Same room. Always registered under his name, paid with a credit card tied to an account you don't have access to." I felt the room start to spin. There are also text messages, Jennifer continued. I was able to access some communications between them. Rebecca, I'm so sorry, but they're explicit. I love you. We'll be together soon, after this is over. The messages go back almost a year. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped iron bands around my ribs and was squeezing. And there are photographs. Jennifer said, her voice softer now. From a security camera at a parking garage near Natalie's office. 2 weeks ago, they were together, kissing. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to keep the sound that wanted to escape trapped inside. Ryan, my husband, the man I'd been married to for 6 years, the man I'd trusted with everything. And Natalie, my sister, the person I'd once believed would always protect me. Together. How long? I managed to say, my voice breaking. How long have they been? At least a year based on the evidence I've found. Maybe longer. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The kitchen around me seemed to blur and tilt. A year. They'd been carrying on an affair for a year. Maybe more. All those business trips Ryan had taken. All those times Natalie had been too busy to see me, too distant to talk. All those family dinners where they'd sat across the table from each other, polite and civil like strangers. It had all been a lie, every single moment of it. Rebecca. Jennifer's voice cut through the fog. Are you still there? I need to tell you the rest. The rest, I whispered. There's more. Yes. Jennifer's tone grew heavier. And this is worse. Your husband isn't just having an affair with your sister, Jennifer said. He's actively helping her steal from your mother. He's a co-conspirator in everything she's done. The words hit me like a physical blow. I traced the offshore account where some of your mother's money was transferred. $50,000 moved from Dorothy's savings 3 months ago. The transfer was authorized by Ryan. He used login credentials tied to your home computer. He had access to your mother's financial accounts through the power of attorney documents Natalie gave him. The IP address, my home. The transactions Jennifer had mentioned before suddenly made perfect, horrible sense. It's not just the money, Jennifer continued. I found email correspondence between Ryan and Natalie. They were coordinating, planning. He knew about the fake death announcement. He knew about the funeral Natalie was arranging. He was helping her execute the entire scheme. I thought I might be sick. From what I can piece together from their messages, they were planning to be together after this was all over. After they'd liquidated your mother's estate, paid off Natalie's debt to Volkov, and split what was left. They were going to leave, start over somewhere else, together. My husband and my sister had conspired to rob my mother, to destroy my family, to abandon me, and they were planning to run away together. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. All those late nights Ryan claimed he'd been working, the overtime, the big project that kept him at the office until 9:10, sometimes 11 o'clock. I'd believed him. I'd never questioned it. The business trips, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago. He'd come home exhausted, smelling like airports and recycled air, and something else I could never quite place. Something sweet. Perfume I'd thought once, but I'd pushed the thought away. Told myself I was being paranoid. The distance between us. The way he'd stopped really seeing me. The way our conversations had become surface-level transactional. How was your day? Fine. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. He'd been physically present but emotionally absent for months. And every time I'd tried to talk to him about my concerns regarding Mom, about Natalie's behavior, about the dementia diagnosis that didn't quite add up, he'd shut me down. You're overthinking it, Rebecca. Let Natalie handle it. Your mom is getting the care she needs. He'd been protecting Natalie, protecting their plan, protecting their affair. I'd been so blind, so stupidly, naively blind. Rebecca, Jennifer's voice pulled me back to the present. I'm so sorry. I know this is devastating. Devastating. The word didn't even begin to cover it. My husband and my sister. The two people I'd loved most in the world. The two people I'd trusted completely. They'd looked me in the eye day after day and lied. They'd sat at my table, slept in my bed, all while plotting behind my back, and it wasn't just about the affair. As much as that betrayal cut through me like a knife, it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they'd done to my mother. Dorothy had raised both Natalie and me. She'd sacrificed for us, worked 2 jobs to put us through school, and in her moment of vulnerability, they'd conspired to rob her. 2 people I loved most had turned on the woman who'd given us everything. I felt something inside me break. My marriage was over. My family was destroyed. "What do I do?" I whispered into the phone. "Right now, you do nothing," Jennifer said firmly. "You don't confront Ryan. You don't call Natalie. Can you do that?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yes." Jennifer's voice dropped. "Rebecca, there's one more thing. We need to talk about what they're planning to do at the funeral. Because whatever's happening tomorrow, it's not just about your mother, and I think we're running out of time." 4 hours later, I sat in Thomas Garrett's office in downtown Denver, staring at the skyline and feeling nothing. The drive had passed in a blur. My mind was still caught between Jennifer's revelations and the wreckage of my marriage. Thomas's office was all dark wood and leather law books lining the walls. Jennifer Blake sat beside me, a folder on her lap. Thomas stood behind his desk, his expression grave. "Thank you for coming, Rebecca," he said quietly. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking, but in a very different way." He paused. "Your mother doesn't have dementia. She never did. Dorothy is completely lucid and has been this entire time." The words took a moment to register. When they did, I felt punched in the chest. "What?" "Your mother has been pretending," Thomas said carefully. "For the past 12 months, she's been faking cognitive decline. The vacant stares, the confusion, the inability to recognize you, all of it was an act." I stared at him, unable to process it. "That's not possible. I've visited her. I've seen her." "I know," Thomas said gently. "She's been very convincing. She had to be, because this entire situation has been a test. A test your mother designed to find out which of her daughters truly loved her and which one only wanted her money." The room tilted. My mother, my sweet, confused, vulnerable mother, had been lying to me for a year. "About 12 months ago, your mother came to see me," Thomas continued. "She'd been my client for over 20 years. She sat where you're sitting and told me she suspected that someone in her family didn't love her for who she was, but for what she had. She didn't know who. She wanted to know the truth before she got too old. I felt sick, so she faked dementia." "She decided to test her daughters," Thomas said. "She asked me to help create a scenario where she'd appear vulnerable, where her finances would be in someone else's hands. She wanted to see who would step up to care for her and who would take advantage." Jennifer spoke up. "Thomas contacted me 3 months into the plan. My job was to monitor both you and Natalie, to document everything, who visited, how often, what they did, and to watch the financial accounts for irregularities." "You were watching me too," I asked, my voice hollow. "Your mother wanted to test both daughters," Jennifer said softly. "She needed to know. You passed Rebecca. You visited 3 to 4 times a week. You brought books, held her hand, talked to her. You never touched her money. But Natalie," I whispered. "Natalie failed," Thomas said simply, spectacularly. I couldn't speak. My mind spun, trying to reconcile everything I'd believed with this new reality. My mother had been lying to me. Every visit, every time I'd sat beside her bed grieving who she used to be, she'd been fully aware, watching me, testing me. "She knew," I said, my voice rising, "she knew everything. She knew Natalie was stealing. She knew about Ryan and Natalie. She knew about Volkov, and she just let it happen." "She had to," Thomas said firmly. "If she'd stopped it too early, we wouldn't have had enough evidence for criminal prosecution. We needed Natalie to go far enough that the case would be airtight. But she could have told me." I stood, anger flooding through the numbness. "Do you know what this year has been like, watching her fade away, thinking I was losing her?" "She couldn't risk it," Jennifer said. If you'd known, you might have reacted differently. Natalie might have sensed something was wrong. The entire operation would have been compromised. Operation. I laughed bitterly. This is my family. It's both, Thomas said quietly. And I know that's hard. But your mother made this choice because she loves you, both of you. She wanted justice, not revenge. And justice requires evidence. I sank back into my chair, too weak to stand. Thomas sat across from me. Your mother is one of the strongest people I've ever known. What she's done living in that facility, pretending to be someone she's not, it's taken incredible strength. But she did it because she needed the truth, and she needed to protect you. Protect me. If she'd confronted Natalie based on suspicion alone, it would have been your word against Natalie's, a family dispute with no resolution. But now, he gestured to Jennifer's files. Now we have bank records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, documented theft. Everything is provable in court. And the funeral, I asked. Is the trap, Thomas said. Natalie's planning a fake funeral for a woman who isn't gone. That's fraud. When Dorothy walks into that funeral alive with police present and witnesses everywhere, there will be no question about what Natalie and Ryan attempted. Jennifer consulted her notes. Dorothy will arrive around 10:30 tomorrow morning. The service starts at 10. We've coordinated with Denver Police. Detective Martinez will be there with 2 officers positioned discreetly. They'll wait until the service is underway until Natalie and Ryan have both spoken publicly. And then, I asked, then your mother walks in, Thomas said, in front of everyone. She'll make a statement, explain what's happened, and the police will make arrests. Natalie and Ryan will be taken into custody for fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and conspiracy. It'll be public, I said slowly. Everyone will know. That's the point, Thomas said. Your mother wants people to understand what happened. She wants other families to learn from this. Thomas opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small black device no bigger than a matchbox. He held it out to me. Your mother wants you to wear this tomorrow. It's a recording device. She has something she needs to say and she wants to make sure there's a record of it. I took the device, turning it over in my hands. It felt impossibly light. She wants me there, I asked. At the funeral. She needs you there, Thomas said. I sat there holding the tiny recorder, trying to process everything. My mother wasn't a victim. She was the architect of everything that was about to happen. And tomorrow, at a funeral for someone who wasn't gone, the truth would finally come out. That evening, Jennifer Blake came to my house with her laptop. It was almost 7 o'clock, and the winter darkness outside made my living room feel like a cave. She sat up on my coffee table without saying much, her face serious and focused. Before tomorrow? She said quietly. I need you to see something. The footage we've been collecting from your mother's room at Pinewood. Thomas and I installed hidden cameras 2 weeks ago with Dorothy's permission. What you're about to watch is going to be hard, but it's also the evidence that's going to put Natalie and Ryan away. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. Jennifer opened a folder on her screen and clicked on the first video file. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Dorothy's room at Pinewood. The timestamp read 1 week ago, 9:43 in the evening. The door opened and Natalie walked in. She wasn't alone. Behind her came a man in his 50s wearing a white coat. Dr. Robert Lawson. They stood near Dorothy's bed. My mother appeared to be sleeping, her breathing slow and even. The sedative will keep her quiet during transport. Lawson said, his voice low but audible. I'll give her the injection Friday morning, about an hour before you pick her up. She won't remember anything. And it'll be out of her system by the time anyone checks. Natalie asked, her voice tense. I'll adjust the dosage to metabolize quickly. By Saturday, there won't be any trace. But Natalie, this is the last time I'm helping you with this. I'm serious. After Friday, I'm done. After Friday, you won't have to, Natalie said. After Friday, it'll all be over. They left. The room went still again. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. They were planning to move her, I whispered, to take her somewhere. "We think so," Jennifer said. "Somewhere isolated where they could control the narrative, maybe stage an accident. We're not sure, but the intent to harm is clear." She clicked to the next video. 3 days ago, afternoon. The door opened again. This time it was Ryan. My husband walked into my mother's room like he belonged there. He pulled up the chair beside her bed and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Hey, Dorothy," he said casually, like he was talking to a piece of furniture. "I know you can't hear me or understand me, but I wanted to come by. Say goodbye, I guess." My mother's face remained blank, her eyes open but unfocused, staring at nothing. "After Friday, everything's going to change," Ryan continued. "Natalie and I will have what we need to start over, together, somewhere far from here, somewhere we can finally be happy." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I know that sounds bad, but you don't understand what it's been like, Dorothy. Being stuck, pretending." And then I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second. Dorothy's eyes shifted. Not much. Just the tiniest flicker of awareness, a micro-expression that came and went so fast I almost missed it. But it was there. She'd heard him. She'd understood every word, and she'd stayed silent, playing her role perfectly. I pressed my hand over my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. My mother had sat there and listened to my husband talk about abandoning me, about stealing from her, about running away with my sister, and she hadn't broken character. "She's so strong," I whispered. "She is," Jennifer agreed softly, "stronger than most people could ever be." Jennifer clicked to the third video. The timestamp read yesterday, late evening. This one was harder to watch. Natalie entered Dorothy's room alone. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a long moment, just staring at her mother. Then she moved to the IV stand beside the bed. From her purse, she pulled out a small syringe. I felt my stomach turn. Natalie attached the syringe to the IV port and slowly pressed the plunger. The clear liquid disappeared into the line. She stood there watching it for a moment, then removed the syringe and tucked it back into her purse. She leaned down close to Dorothy's ear, her voice barely audible on the recording. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't have any other choice. Volkov will end me if I don't pay him. I can't let that happen. I'm sorry." She straightened up, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and left. I sat there staring at the frozen image on the screen. My sister. Injecting my mother with something meant to harm her, apologizing as she did it, crying as she did it, but doing it anyway. "What was in the syringe?" I asked, my voice hollow. "A sedative," Jennifer said, "strong enough to keep her drowsy and compliant, but not strong enough to cause lasting harm." Natalie wasn't trying to end Dorothy's life. She was trying to control her, make her easier to manipulate. But she was still willing to hurt her. "Yes," Jennifer said simply. "She was." I couldn't stop the tears now. They came in waves, hot and bitter. Because what I'd just watched wasn't a monster. It was my sister, terrified, desperate, trapped by her own terrible choices, and still making more terrible choices to try to escape. "We have everything," Jennifer said, closing the laptop. "Bank records showing the $340,000 Natalie transferred out of your mother's accounts over 10 months. These surveillance videos showing conspiracy intent to harm and the actual administration of an unauthorized sedative. Audio recordings of conversations between Natalie and Ryan discussing their plans, text messages, hotel receipts, financial documents linking Ryan to the offshore accounts." She looked at me, her expression somber. "This is an airtight case, Rebecca. When the police arrest them tomorrow, they won't be able to deny any of it. Everything is documented. Everything is provable." I nodded numbly, unable to find words. Jennifer reached across the coffee table and paused the video on a still frame. Natalie's face captured in the moment just after she'd injected Dorothy. Her expression was a mess of fear and grief and desperation. Tears streaked her cheeks. Her eyes were hollow. "Tomorrow we end this," Jennifer said quietly. "All of it comes out, in front of everyone. Your mother will walk into that funeral alive, and Natalie and Ryan will be arrested in front of dozens of witnesses. It'll be public, it'll be messy, and it'll be final. She looked at me, her gaze steady and unflinching. But Rebecca, I need to ask you something. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to watch your family fall apart in public? Because once we start this tomorrow, there's no going back. I stared at Natalie's frozen face on the screen. The sister who'd once saved my life. The sister who'd just tried to harm our mother. Yes, I whispered. I'm ready. The night before the funeral stretched endlessly. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me, and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly safe. It was almost 10 o'clock when I gave up pretending. I got out of bed and went downstairs to the kitchen. The house felt too big, too empty. Ryan hadn't come home. I'd gotten a text around 8 saying he had to extend his business trip another night. Emergency client meeting. I didn't bother responding. I knew where he was, who he was with. I made coffee I wouldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table with all the documents Jennifer had given me. Bank statements, surveillance photos, transcripts of text messages, a timeline of events stretching back 12 months. I spread them out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve, trying to find the moment when everything had gone wrong, the exact second when my family had stopped being a family and started being something else, something broken beyond repair. But I couldn't find it. Maybe there wasn't one moment. Maybe it had been gradual, a slow erosion I'd been too close to see. I thought about Natalie, my big sister, the person I'd looked up to my entire childhood. There was this memory that kept coming back to me. I must have been 7, maybe 8 years old. We were at school and there was this boy, Marcus, something who'd been picking on me for weeks, calling me names, pushing me on the playground. I was too scared to tell anyone. But Natalie found out. She was in 6th grade, 3 years older than me, and she marched right up to Marcus during recess and got in his face. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw his expression change from cocky to terrified in about 2 seconds flat. He never bothered me again. That night, Natalie sat on the edge of my bed and told me something I'd never forgotten. Nobody gets to hurt you, Rebecca. Not while I'm around. That's what big sisters are for. I'd believed her completely. For years, I'd believed that Natalie would always protect me, that she'd always be on my side no matter what. When did that change? When did I stop being someone worth protecting and start being someone in her way? I thought about Ryan, my husband, the man I'd married 6 years ago in front of everyone we loved, promising to stand by each other through everything. I could still remember that day so clearly. The way he'd looked at me when I walked down the aisle, the way his voice had cracked a little when he said his vows. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. I'd cried, happy tears, believing every word, believing we had our whole lives ahead of us. Forever, he'd whispered when we kissed. You and me forever. 6 years. That's how long forever had lasted. 6 years before he decided someone else's sister was more interesting than his wife. 6 years before he decided my mother's money was worth more than my trust. I wondered if he'd meant any of it that day, or if some part of him had always been waiting for something better to come along. I thought about my mother, Dorothy Mitchell, 63 years old, strong, smart, fiercely independent. She'd raised Natalie and me mostly on her own after Dad left. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed and in a decent school district. She'd never complained, never made us feel like we were a burden, even though I'm sure we were. I remembered coming home from school and finding her asleep on the couch in her work uniform, too exhausted to make it to bed. I remembered her showing up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every basketball game I was terrible at. She was always there. And now because she dared to grow older, because she dared to accumulate a little bit of wealth, she'd been forced to pretend to lose her mind just to find out which of her daughters actually loved her. That thought made me want to break something. My mother shouldn't have had to do that. She shouldn't have had to test us. We should have just loved her, taken care of her, been there for her the way she'd always been there for us. But we hadn't. Natalie hadn't. And I'd been too blind to see what was happening until it was almost too late. Where did we go wrong? I didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Around 3 in the morning, I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing, a letter to my mother. I didn't know if I'd ever give it to her, but I needed to say the words anyway. Needed to get them out of my head and onto something solid. I wrote about how sorry I was, how I should have seen what Natalie was doing sooner, how I should have protected her better. I wrote about how proud I was of her strength, even though part of me was angry she'd felt the need to test me in the first place. I wrote about how much I loved her, how much I'd always loved her, how nothing that happened tomorrow would change that. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse. I never sent it, never gave it to her. But somehow, writing it made me feel a little more grounded, a little more ready for what was coming. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the sky outside was turning from black to gray. I went upstairs and showered, then stood in my closet trying to decide what you're supposed to wear to your mother's fake funeral. I settled on a simple black dress. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention, just black fabric and a pair of low heels I could walk in. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My eyes were red from lack of sleep. My face looked older than it had a week ago, but there was something else there too, something harder, something determined. Today I was going to watch my sister get arrested. I was going to watch my husband get arrested. I was going to stand in front of dozens of people and watch my family fall apart in the most public, humiliating way possible. And I was going to do it anyway, because it was the right thing to do, because my mother deserved justice, because the truth mattered more than my comfort. Today I choose truth, I said to my reflection, whatever the cost. I grabbed my purse, checked that the small recording device Thomas had given me was inside, and headed for the door. The drive to Heritage Memorial Chapel took 15 minutes through quiet Denver streets. The city was just waking up. Coffee shops opening, early commuters heading to work, normal people having normal Friday mornings. I envied them. As I pulled into the parking lot of the funeral home, I saw other cars already there, early arrivals. People who'd known my mother, people who thought they were here to mourn. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Somewhere inside that building, Natalie was probably already setting up, making sure everything was perfect for her fake funeral, making sure all the lies were in place. And somewhere, maybe already on her way, was my mother, alive, aware, ready to expose everything. I didn't know which version of my sister I would face today, the hero who'd once saved my life, or the villain who'd tried to destroy everything we had. Maybe both, maybe neither, maybe someone I'd never really known at all. I got out of the car and walked toward the chapel doors. It was time. Heritage Memorial Chapel looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, tasteful, dignified, a place where people came to say goodbye. I arrived just after 9, one of the first to enter through the heavy wooden doors. The interior was all polished oak and stained glass, soft morning light filtering through windows that depicted scenes of peace and eternal rest. Organ music played quietly from hidden speakers, something classical and mournful that I didn't recognize. The main chapel had been set up for a service. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform at the front, and there, centered on that platform, was a closed casket. Dark wood, brass handles, a spray of white lilies draped across the top. Empty, I reminded myself. There's no one in there. But my heart still clenched at the sight of it. On either side of the casket stood easels displaying photographs of my mother. Dorothy at 30 laughing in someone's backyard. Dorothy at 50 holding a grandchild I didn't recognize. Dorothy last year, her face tired but smiling, standing in front of her cabin near Estes Park, the cabin Natalie had sold without permission. I walked slowly down the center aisle, taking it all in. More flowers. Roses, carnations arrangements sent by people who thought they were mourning. A guest book on a small table near the entrance, already signed by a few early arrivals. Programs stacked neatly beside it, each one bearing my mother's name and a quote about love and family. The irony was suffocating. I chose a seat in the front row off to the side where I could see both the platform and the entrance. I set my purse on the floor beside me and felt the weight of the recording device inside. Small, powerful, ready to capture whatever my mother wanted the world to hear. People began arriving around 9:15. I recognized some of them. Mrs. Margaret from 2 doors down from Mom's old house in Littleton, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, who'd been part of her bridge club. A few women I vaguely remembered from church functions years ago. They came in slowly, quietly signing the guest book and finding seats. They whispered to each other in that particular tone people use at funerals. Hushed, respectful, sad. So sudden. I just saw her 3 months ago. She seemed fine. Poor Natalie, having to handle all of this alone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them the truth right then and there. But I stayed in my seat, hands folded in my lap, and waited. Around 9:20, I spotted Thomas Garrett and Jennifer Blake entering through a side door. They moved quietly to the back corner of the chapel, choosing seats that gave them a clear view of the entire room, but kept them out of the main flow of traffic. Thomas caught my eye for just a moment and gave me the smallest nod. Jennifer's expression was calm, professional, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. They were ready. The police would be positioned outside waiting for the signal. Everything was in place. All we needed now was for Natalie and Ryan to play their parts. At 9:30, they arrived. The main doors opened and Natalie walked in first. She was wearing a black dress that hit just below her knees, a single strand of pearls, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked perfect, composed, every inch the grieving daughter. Ryan followed half a step behind her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. He wore a black suit, white shirt, conservative tie. His face was appropriately solemn, his eyes downcast. They moved through the chapel like they belonged there, Natalie stopping to hug Mrs. Margaret accepting condolences from the Pattersons, thanking people for coming. Ryan shaking hands, murmuring quiet words of appreciation. It was a performance, and they were both very good at it. Natalie's eyes swept the room, and for a moment they landed on me. Our gazes locked. I saw her mask slip just for a fraction of a second. The sadness fell away, and underneath it was something raw and terrified. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. Then the mask snapped back into place and she looked away, continuing her rounds. Ryan didn't look at me at all. He kept his eyes on the floor, on the other guests, on Natalie. Anywhere but at his wife. Former wife, I corrected myself. Whatever legal papers we still needed to sign didn't matter. The marriage was over. Had been over probably long before I'd realized it. I watched them make their way to the front row on the opposite side of the aisle from where I sat. They settled into their seats, Natalie smoothing her dress, Ryan adjusting his tie. From where I sat, I could see Natalie's purse resting on her lap, and I could see her phone screen light up through the thin fabric. She pulled the phone out just enough to glance at it. Her face went pale. She declined the call and shoved the phone back into her purse. It rang again 30 seconds later. She ignored it, and again. By the third call, her hands were shaking. She kept them folded tightly in her lap, but I could see the tremor, could see the way her jaw clenched, the way her eyes darted toward the exit, like she was calculating whether she could run. Volkov. It had to be. The deadline was closing in and he wanted his money. And Natalie was sitting in a fake funeral pretending to mourn a woman who wasn't gone desperately trying to hold everything together long enough to steal what she needed. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. At 9:45, the funeral director stepped to the front of the room. He was an older man, silver-haired and dignified in his dark suit. He moved to the podium beside the casket and cleared his throat gently. The quiet conversations throughout the chapel died down. Everyone turned their attention forward. "Good morning," the director said, his voice low and soothing. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the life of Dorothy Mitchell. I know this is a difficult time for the family, and your presence here means a great deal." He paused, glancing down at the notes in front of him. "We'll begin this morning with words from those who knew Dorothy best. First, we'll hear from her son-in-law, Ryan Carter. Then her daughter, Natalie Mitchell, will share some memories. And after that, we'll open the floor to anyone who would like to say a few words." My pulse was hammering in my ears. This was it. the moment we'd been building toward. Once Ryan and Natalie spoke publicly about my mother's passing, once they stood in front of all these witnesses and lied about her being gone, there would be no taking it back, no explaining it away. The evidence would be undeniable. Ryan, the director, said, gesturing toward him, "Whenever you're ready." Ryan stood. He buttoned his suit jacket with practiced ease and walked to the front of the chapel. His shoes clicked softly against the hardwood floor. He stepped up to the podium, gripped its edges with both hands, and took a deep breath. I stared at him. At this man I'd shared a life with for 6 years. This man who'd slept beside me, eaten meals with me, promised to love me forever. This man who'd been planning to abandon me and run away with my sister. The funeral director stepped aside, giving Ryan the floor. The chapel was completely silent, everyone waiting, everyone watching. And I realized with a clarity that felt almost physical that this was the last time I would ever call him my husband. Whatever happened next, whoever he was after today, he would no longer be mine. Ryan looked out at the assembled guests, his expression carefully neutral. Then he began to speak. Ryan's words filled the chapel like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to escape. Dorothy Mitchell was a remarkable woman. He began, his voice steady and solemn, each syllable carefully measured. A devoted mother, a tireless advocate for her daughters, a woman who taught us all what it means to put family first. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, my face a mask of composure. But inside I was burning, because I knew the truth. Ryan stood at the podium, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his expression somber and sincere. To everyone else in this room, he looked like a grieving son-in-law delivering a heartfelt tribute. But to me, he looked like exactly what he was: a liar, a thief, a man who had betrayed the woman he was pretending to honor. Dorothy believed in loyalty. Ryan continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. She believed in trust. She believed that family was everything, that no matter what happened, you stood by the people you loved. My jaw tightened. I could feel my nails digging into my palms. Trust. The word echoed in my mind, bitter and sharp. Ryan had stood in our kitchen 6 months ago and told me he loved me. He had kissed me goodnight and left for business trips that I now knew were rendezvous with my sister. He had accessed my mother's bank accounts from our home computer, transferred $50,000 to an offshore account, and helped orchestrate a fake funeral, all while playing the role of the devoted husband. And now he was standing in front of a room full of people, eulogizing the woman he had helped steal from. I thought of Jennifer's voice on the phone just yesterday. "Rebecca, we have proof. Ritz-Carlton records, text messages, surveillance footage. Ryan and Natalie have been planning this for months." I had asked her how long. How long had my husband been sleeping with my sister? How long had they been plotting to drain my mother's accounts and disappear together? "At least a year," Jennifer had said quietly. "Maybe longer." A year. 365 days of lies. Of late nights at the office that weren't really at the office. Of perfume on his collar that I had convinced myself was nothing. Of him holding my hand across the dinner table and asking me about my day, all while planning a future that didn't include me. Ryan's voice pulled me back to the present. Dorothy also believed in second chances, he was saying now, his tone warm and reflective. She believed that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, that love, real love, meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt, even when it was hard. I almost laughed. Forgiveness. He was talking about forgiveness, as if he had any right to that word. As if my mother, who was alive, who was lucid, who had orchestrated this entire charade to expose the people who had betrayed her, would ever forgive what he and Natalie had done. I glanced to my right, where Natalie sat in the second row. She was dressed in black, her face pale and drawn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. To anyone else, she looked like a grieving daughter, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the back of the room every few seconds, the way her phone tucked into her purse kept buzzing. Volkov. It had to be Volkov. Jennifer had told me about the debt. $180,000 compounded at 20 to 30% interest monthly. A loan that had started at $50,000 and spiraled out of control. A deadline of January 31st, less than 3 weeks away. Natalie was desperate, and desperate people did terrible things. But Ryan wasn't desperate. Ryan had a stable job, a comfortable life, a wife who loved him. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. And that somehow was worse. Ryan was still talking. "I'll never forget the first time I met Dorothy," he said, a faint smile crossing his face. "Rebecca had just introduced us, and Dorothy looked me right in the eye and said, 'You'd better take care of my daughter, because if you don't, you'll answer to me.'" A soft ripple of laughter moved through the chapel. Ryan chuckled, his expression fond. "And I promised her I would. I promised her that I would always put Rebecca first, that I would always be honest, that I would always stop." The word left my mouth before I could stop it. The chapel fell silent. Every head turned toward me. Ryan froze, his mouth half open, his eyes wide with shock. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. "Just stop," I said again, louder this time. My voice echoed off the oak walls, off the stained glass windows, off the closed casket at the front of the room. Natalie's face had gone white. Her hand flew to her mouth. Ryan recovered quickly, his expression shifting from shock to concern. "Rebecca," he said gently, his voice laced with sympathy. "I know this is hard. Maybe you should sit down." "No." I shook my head, my gaze locked on his. "I'm not sitting down, and I'm not letting you stand up there and lie to these people anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Rebecca, you're upset," Ryan said, his tone still calm, still reasonable. "This is a difficult day for all of us. Maybe we should—" "This funeral is a lie," I said clearly, my voice cutting through his. The murmur grew louder. Ryan's jaw tightened. Natalie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" Natalie hissed, her voice low and panicked. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Ryan. "You want to talk about loyalty?" I said, my voice shaking now, not with fear, but with fury. "You want to talk about trust, about putting family first?" Ryan opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "You stole from her," I said. "You and Natalie. $340,000 over 10 months. You sold her cabin in Estes Park to a shell company for $400,000, half of what it was worth. You faked a dementia diagnosis with the help of Natalie's friend from college, and you planned this funeral so you could liquidate the rest of her estate and disappear together." The chapel erupted. Voices overlapped, shocked, disbelieving, angry. Someone gasped. Someone else shouted a question. Mrs. Margaret from Littleton stood up, her hand over her heart. Natalie's face crumpled. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice breaking. "You're grieving, you're confused." "I'm not confused," I said, turning to face her. "I'm the clearest I've ever been." Ryan stepped down from the podium, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Everyone, please," he said, his voice firm. "This is clearly a very emotional moment. Rebecca has been under a lot of stress, and I think—" I pulled out my phone and held it up for everyone to see. "Because I have proof," I said. "Bank records, surveillance footage, text messages between the two of you, and the woman you're all here to mourn." I paused, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. She's not dead. The chapel doors opened. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. And then Dorothy Mitchell stepped inside. She was alive, healthy, dressed in a deep navy suit with a silk scarf at her throat, her silver hair pinned back in a neat bun. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, her eyes sharp and clear. The room erupted. Someone screamed. Mrs. Margaret clutched her chest and sat down hard in her pew. The Pattersons stood, mouths open, hands frozen mid-gesture. A man in the back row shouted, "What the hell?" Natalie staggered backward, her face draining of all color. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. Ryan stood frozen at the podium, his face a mask of shock, and me, I felt my knees buckle. I grabbed the edge of the pew to steady myself, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't realized were there. Mom, she was here. She was alive. She was okay. Dorothy walked slowly down the center aisle, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the chapel followed her. No one spoke. No one dared. She moved with the kind of quiet dignity that I remembered from my childhood, the way she used to walk into parent-teacher conferences or sit across from bill collectors, her spine straight, her jaw set. She'd always been a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room, and right now, in this moment, she was in complete control. She reached the front of the chapel and turned to face the assembled guests. Her gaze swept over them, over the friends and neighbors who had come to mourn her, over the people who had brought flowers and casseroles and cards. And then her eyes found mine. I saw a flicker of something there, sadness maybe, or pride. She gave me the smallest nod, and then she turned to address the room. I know this is a shock, Dorothy said, her voice steady and clear, and I apologize for that. But I need all of you here today not to mourn me, but to bear witness to the truth. The murmurs started up again, but Dorothy raised a hand and the room fell silent. 12 months ago, she continued, I began to suspect that someone close to me cared more about my money than they cared about me. I suspected that if I became vulnerable, if I appeared weak or confused or unable to defend myself, that person would reveal their true intentions. She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. So I made a choice. I decided to test the people I loved. I asked my longtime attorney, Thomas Garrett, to help me orchestrate a plan. I would pretend to suffer from dementia. I would allow myself to be placed in a care facility, and I would watch carefully to see who showed up for me and who showed up for my assets. A ripple of understanding moved through the room. Some people nodded. Others looked confused. A few glanced toward Natalie, whose face was now buried in her hands. Dorothy's gaze didn't waver. For 12 months, I watched, she said, and I learned everything I needed to know. Rebecca? Dorothy said, her voice softening slightly as she looked at me. Came to visit me 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She brought books. She read to me. She held my hand even when she thought I couldn't understand her. She told me about her life, her struggles, her fears. She treated me like a person, not like a burden. My throat tightened. I couldn't look away from her. But Natalie, Dorothy continued, her tone hardening, came once a month. And every time she came, it was to move money, to forge documents, to manipulate my accounts, to plan how she would liquidate my estate and disappear. Natalie's head snapped up. Mom, please, no. Dorothy's voice was sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. You don't get to speak. Not yet. You've had 12 months to speak, 12 months to come clean, 12 months to choose honesty over greed, and you chose greed every single time. Natalie's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. You stole $340,000 from me. Dorothy said each word deliberate and precise. You sold my cabin in Estes Park, the home your father and I built together, to a shell company for $400,000. Half of what it was worth. You placed me in Pinewood Senior Living and gave me sedatives so I couldn't resist, so I couldn't fight back, so I couldn't tell anyone what you were doing. I didn't have a choice. Natalie sobbed, her voice breaking. Mom, you don't understand. Volkov was going to kill me. I owed him $180,000 and the deadline was... You had a choice, Dorothy said coldly. You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. You could have been honest. But instead, you chose to lie. You chose to steal. You chose to drug your own mother and stage her death. Natalie shook her head violently, her hands trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. You chose greed, Dorothy said again, and now you'll face the consequences. Dorothy turned to Ryan, who had been standing motionless at the podium, his face ashen. And you, she said, her voice laced with contempt, you didn't just betray your wife. You conspired to steal from an elderly woman. You accessed my accounts. You transferred $50,000 to an offshore account. You helped plan this funeral so you and Natalie could liquidate the rest of my estate and start a new life together. Ryan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You're not just an adulterer, Dorothy said. You're a criminal, and you will be treated as such. At the back of the chapel, Thomas Garrett stood and raised his hand. The doors opened again, and this time 3 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Behind them was a man in a dark suit and tie, Detective Martinez, according to the badge clipped to his belt. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Detective Martinez walked down the aisle, his expression serious and professional. He stopped in front of Natalie and Ryan, his hand resting on the cuffs at his belt. "Natalie Mitchell," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Ryan Carter, you are both under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." "No," Natalie whispered, shaking her head. No. Ryan took a step back, his hands raised. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. We can explain. You'll have the opportunity to explain at the station," Detective Martinez said evenly. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The chapel was dead silent now. I watched as the officers moved forward, flanking Natalie and Ryan. I watched as Natalie's shoulders shook with sobs, as Ryan's jaw tightened with barely suppressed panic. And then Natalie's eyes darted to the side door. Her hand shot out and grabbed Ryan's wrist. "Run!" she screamed. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below telling us what you're feeling right now. Shock, relief, anger. We want to hear from you. And a quick note, while the story ahead continues to draw on real themes of justice and healing, some elements are fictionalized for dramatic and educational purposes. If you'd prefer to stop here at the climax, we completely understand. But if you want to see how Rebecca and Dorothy rebuild their lives after this moment, keep watching, because the journey doesn't end with the arrest. They bolted. Natalie grabbed Ryan's wrist and pulled him toward the side door of the chapel. Ryan stumbled, then found his footing and ran beside her, his face pale and desperate. The officers reacted instantly. Detective Martinez barked an order and 2 uniformed cops sprinted after them, their boots thundering against the hardwood floor. And I, without thinking, without planning, ran too. "Natalie!" I shouted, my voice raw. "Stop!" But she didn't stop. She shoved through the side door and burst into the bright January sunlight, Ryan half a step behind her. I followed, my heart hammering, my breath coming in short gasps. The parking lot stretched out before us, rows of cars glinting in the cold morning light. Natalie veered left, her heels clicking frantically against the asphalt. Ryan pulled ahead of her, his longer stride carrying him toward a dark sedan parked near the back fence. I pushed harder, my legs burning. I didn't know why I was chasing her. I didn't know what I would say if I caught her, but I couldn't stop. "Natalie!" I screamed again. She glanced back over her shoulder, and in that moment of distraction, her heel caught on the uneven pavement. She stumbled, her arms windmilling, and I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. She spun around, her face a mask of tears and fury. "Let go of me, Rebecca." "No." I held on tight, my fingers digging into her arm. "You don't get to run. Not now. Not after everything." Behind us, the officers were closing in. Ryan had reached the sedan and was yanking on the door handle, but it was locked. He swore and slapped his hands against the window, his panic rising. Natalie's chest heaved. Her eyes were wild red rimmed, desperate. "Please," she whispered. "Please, just let me go." "Why?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why did you do this? Why did you throw everything away?" Her face crumpled. "Because you were always the favorite." She screamed the words tearing out of her like they'd been buried for years. "Because Mom loved you more. Because you had everything, the perfect marriage, the career, her love, and I had nothing." I stared at her, stunned. "That's not true. My marriage wasn't perfect. My life wasn't perfect. I struggled just like you." "But you had her," Natalie sobbed. "You had Mom. She looked at you the way she never looked at me. And I tried, God, I tried so hard. But it was never enough. I was never enough." My throat tightened. I thought you loved me. You saved my life." Natalie's gaze dropped to her right forearm where the jagged scar ran from her wrist to her elbow, the scar she'd earned pulling me out of the Big Thompson River when we were kids. She touched it absently, her fingers trembling. "I did love you," she whispered. "I still do, but I couldn't breathe under your shadow anymore, so you destroyed us all." I said, my voice shaking. "You stole from Mom. You drugged her. You faked her death. You slept with my husband. You destroyed us." Natalie's face twisted with pain. "I destroyed myself," she said quietly. "I know that now." The officers reached us then. One of them gently but firmly took Natalie's arm and pulled her away from me. She didn't resist. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face as the officer turned her around and cuffed her wrists behind her back. "Natalie Mitchell." Detective Martinez said, reading from a small card in his hand, "You are under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent." Natalie wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on mine. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I'm not the sister you remember anymore." I couldn't speak. I could only watch as the officers led her toward the patrol car. Ryan was cuffed separately, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just stared at the ground as the officer read him his rights and guided him toward a second patrol car. A coward. That's what he was. A coward who had betrayed me, conspired with my sister, and now couldn't even face me. I felt nothing when I looked at him. No anger, no grief. Just a hollow kind of relief that I would never have to share a home with him again. Back inside the chapel, Jennifer Blake approached Detective Martinez with a small silver USB drive in her hand. "Everything's on here," she said crisply. "Bank records showing the transfers, surveillance footage from Pinewood, audio recordings from Natalie's phone. It's all time-stamped and verified." Martinez nodded and took the drive, slipping it into an evidence bag. Thomas Garrett stepped forward next, holding a thin manila folder. "Legal documentation of the power of attorney fraud," he said. "Forged signatures, falsified medical assessments. Dr. Robert Lawson has already agreed to a plea deal in exchange for his testimony." Martinez's eyebrows rose. "Lawson's cooperating." Thomas nodded. "He'll confirm that Natalie paid him to exaggerate Dorothy's cognitive decline and falsify the dementia diagnosis. He's prepared to testify in court." Martinez looked satisfied. "Good, that seals it." The chapel was emptying now. The guests, shocked, confused some of them, crying, filed out slowly, whispering to one another. Mrs. Margaret paused at the door and looked back at me, her eyes full of sympathy. She didn't say anything. She just pressed her hand to her heart and left. The Pattersons followed, then the others. One by one, they disappeared into the cold January morning, leaving the chapel silent and hollow. And then it was just me and my mother. Dorothy crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. I collapsed into her, my body shaking with sobs I hadn't realized I was holding in. She held me tight, one hand stroking my hair, the other pressed against my back. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm so sorry you had to see this, but you needed to know the truth." "I know," I whispered. "I know." We stood there for a long time, the two of us alone in the empty chapel. The casket still sat at the front of the room, a prop in a play that had ended. The flowers still lined the walls. The photos of my mother's life still gazed down at us from their easels. But everything had changed. When I finally pulled back, I wiped my eyes and looked at her. "What happens now?" I asked. Dorothy took my hands in hers. "Now we rebuild," she said simply. "We heal. We move forward together." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Because as I stood there in that empty chapel, my mother alive, my sister arrested my marriage over, I realized something. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was learning to live with the truth. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I moved through the motions, mechanically signing documents, answering questions from Detective Martinez, sitting across from lawyers who spoke in careful tones about restitution and probation. The words washed over me like white noise. It wasn't until mid-February when Thomas called me into his office to review the final sentencing outcomes that the fog began to lift. Thomas sat across from me, a thick folder open on his desk. "Natalie's sentencing hearing was yesterday," he said gently. "She pled guilty to all charges: elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and administering sedatives without consent." He paused. "She was sentenced to 7 years in a Colorado State correctional facility. She's also been ordered to pay full restitution to your mother, $340,000, plus an additional $75,000 in fines and court costs. After her release, she'll be on probation for 5 years. 7 years. I tried to picture my sister in prison, but I couldn't. All I could see was the girl who had pulled me out of the river when I was 8, the girl who had once been my hero. She asked if she could write to you," Thomas added quietly. "You're under no obligation to respond." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." "Ryan's sentencing was similar," Thomas continued. "He pled guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and theft. He received 6 years and was ordered to pay restitution. The judge also issued a no-contact order. He's not allowed to reach out to you or your mother in any way." I felt nothing, just a dull sense of finality. "And Dr. Lawson?" I asked. "His medical license has been permanently revoked. He's been sentenced to 2 years of probation and fined $50,000. His testimony was critical in securing Natalie's conviction, so the prosecution agreed to a lighter sentence." I nodded slowly. It felt like justice, but it didn't erase what had been done. Thomas cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. Marcus Volkov." My stomach tightened. "We were concerned he might come after your mother seeking repayment of Natalie's debt. Dorothy and I negotiated with him. She agreed to pay the full outstanding balance, $180,000, on Natalie's behalf. In exchange, Volkov agreed to close the account and cease all collection efforts. Natalie is prohibited from ever contacting him again." I stared at him. "Mom paid his debt." Thomas nodded. "She wanted to protect you, and in a way she wanted to protect Natalie even after everything." I didn't know what to say, but I understood. That was who Dorothy Mitchell was. Even in the face of betrayal, she chose protection over revenge. I filed for divorce from Ryan in late January. Thomas handled most of it. Ryan didn't contest anything. I kept the townhouse in Cherry Creek. Ryan was entitled to nothing thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the criminal conviction. The divorce was finalized in early March. When the papers arrived, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the words "dissolution of marriage" printed in stark black ink, and I felt lighter. Not happy, not whole, but lighter. I was free. My mother moved out of Pinewood in mid-February. Thomas helped her find a 2-bedroom apartment just 10 minutes from my townhouse. It had large windows, a small balcony overlooking a park, and enough space for her books and her plants. I helped her unpack. We spent a Saturday afternoon arranging furniture and hanging pictures. "I like it here," Mom said as we stood on the balcony. "It feels like a fresh start." I nodded. "It does." She took my hand. "We're going to be okay," she said firmly, both of us. And for the first time in months, I thought she might be right. I took a leave of absence from my graphic design job in late January. I started seeing a therapist in early February. Her name was Dr. Patel, and her office was a small, cozy space with soft lighting and shelves full of books about trauma and resilience. At first, I didn't know what to say. I sat on her couch and stared at my hands. "Start anywhere," she said gently. "There's no wrong place to begin." So I did. I told her about the funeral, about Natalie and Ryan, about the affair and the theft and the lies, about the moment my mother walked into the chapel alive and whole. And slowly, week by week, I started to untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying. The anger, the grief, the betrayal, the guilt. "You didn't cause this," Dr. Patel reminded me. "You're not responsible for the choices other people made." I knew that. Intellectually, I knew that. But it took time for my heart to believe it. I started rebuilding my social life too. I reached out to old friends. I joined a book club. I started going to yoga classes on Saturday mornings. I took long walks through Washington Park, and I stayed in Denver. Part of me wanted to run to pack up and move somewhere no one knew my story, but I didn't, because Denver was my home, and I wasn't going to let what had happened take that away from me. One afternoon in mid-March, I sat in Dr. Patel's office and told her about a dream I'd had. I was standing at the edge of a river, I said, and I was scared. But I stepped in anyway. And the water was cold, but it didn't pull me under. I just waded through, and on the other side, there was sunlight. Dr. Patel smiled. That's a powerful image. I think I'm starting to believe it, I said quietly. That I can get through this, that I can be okay again. She nodded. You're already doing it, Rebecca, one day at a time. And slowly, one day at a time, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be okay again. By spring, I was beginning to understand what okay could look like. It wasn't about erasing what had happened or pretending the betrayal hadn't cut deep. It was about finding a way to live with the scars and maybe using them to help someone else. The idea came on a sunny April afternoon. I was sitting on Mom's balcony watching the trees turn green with new leaves when she said something that changed everything. We should do something with what happened, she said quietly. Make it mean something. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? I mean, we shouldn't let this story end with Natalie in prison and you in therapy. We should use what we survived to protect other people, other families. And just like that, the Dorothy Mitchell Elder Protection Fund was born. We officially launched the fund in May of 2024. Thomas Garrett helped us with the legal framework, setting up the nonprofit, filing the paperwork, navigating the tax code. It took weeks of meetings and revisions, but by mid-May, we were officially registered. Mom contributed $500,000 of her own money as seed funding. It was money she'd saved over decades, money that Natalie hadn't managed to steal, and she wanted to use it to make sure what happened to her didn't happen to anyone else. The mission was simple: to protect elderly individuals from financial abuse and to educate families about the risks associated with power of attorney arrangements. The fund would provide free legal clinics for seniors who suspected they were being taken advantage of. We would host educational workshops to teach families how to recognize warning signs. We would create a hotline 1-800-ELDER-PROTECT that people could call for help. We would establish support groups for victims and their families. And we would lobby the Colorado State Legislature to tighten oversight on power of attorney designations. It was ambitious. It was overwhelming. But it felt right. By June, we had rented a small office space in downtown Denver and hired a part-time coordinator. Our first legal clinic was held on a Saturday morning in July at a community center in Aurora. We partnered with a local law firm that provided pro bono attorneys, and we set up tables with pamphlets, resources, and intake forms. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me worried no one would show up, but they did. More than 30 people came that first day. Elderly men and women, adult children caring for aging parents, people who had questions, fears, stories that sounded heartbreakingly familiar. One woman, her name was Margaret, sat across from me and told me her son had been withdrawing money from her account for 2 years. When she confronted him, he'd told her she was confused, that she'd given him permission, that she just didn't remember. I held her hand and told her she wasn't confused, that what was happening to her was real, and that we were going to help. By the end of the day, we had opened 12 new cases. The workshops started in August. We held them at libraries, senior centers, and churches throughout the Denver metro area. I designed the materials myself, flyers, brochures, PowerPoint slides, using the graphic design skills I'd honed over years. Mom often spoke at these events, sharing her story with a candor that left audiences silent and tearful. I was lucky, she would say. I had the resources to fight back. I had a lawyer. I had my daughter, but not everyone does, and that's why we're here. The hotline launched in September, 1-800-ELDER-PROTECT. We staffed it with trained volunteers who could provide immediate support and connect callers with legal resources. In the first month alone, we received over 50 calls. By the end of the year, the numbers were staggering. We had helped more than 200 elderly individuals navigate cases of suspected or confirmed financial abuse. Through our legal clinics and partnerships with law enforcement, we had recovered over $2.1 million in stolen assets. 15 abusers had been prosecuted, some receiving prison sentences, others probation and restitution orders. And we had educated more than 50 families through our workshops. But the numbers didn't capture the whole story. The real impact was in the faces of the people we helped. The elderly woman who cried with relief when we helped her freeze her bank accounts. The son who apologized for not believing his mother when she said something was wrong. The daughter who stood up in one of our support groups and said, "I thought I was the only one." That was what mattered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the woman whose husband and sister had betrayed her. I became someone else, someone with a mission. I used my graphic design skills to create everything the fund needed: logos, websites, social media graphics, donor appeals. I learned how to pitch to philanthropists and write compelling stories about the people we served. And I started speaking at events. The first time was terrifying. I stood in front of a room full of strangers and said, "My sister stole from my mother, my husband helped her, and I didn't see it coming." My voice shook, my hands trembled. But when I finished, a woman in the front row stood up and said, "Thank you, I needed to hear that." And slowly, one speech at a time, I began to feel like myself again. Not the self I'd been before that version was gone, but a new self, stronger, more purposeful. One evening in November, Mom and I sat in her apartment reviewing the fund's end-of-year report. "We did this," she said softly, looking at the numbers on the page. "We actually did this." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with tears. "I lost a daughter to greed Rebecca, but I gained a mission. And maybe we're saving other mothers from the same fate." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We are, Mom. We really are." I started dating again in October. It wasn't something I'd planned, but I met someone at a volunteer event, a man named David, who worked with a nonprofit that provided meals to homebound seniors. He was kind, patient. He didn't push. We started with coffee, then dinner, then a walk through Washington Park on a crisp autumn afternoon. When I told him my story, he listened without judgment. And he didn't run. It felt strange at first, trusting someone new, letting someone in, but it also felt possible. Mom was thrilled. "You deserve this," she told me. "You deserve to be happy." And maybe for the first time in a long time, I was starting to believe her. Mom and I grew closer than we'd ever been. We saw each other almost every day, planning fund events, reviewing cases, or just sitting on her balcony with coffee and talking. She told me stories about my father, about her childhood, about the woman she'd been before she became a mother, and I told her about my fears, my hopes, my dreams for the future. We had lost so much, but we had also found something precious each other. And as I stood beside my mother at our first annual fundraising gala in December, surrounded by donors and supporters and people whose lives we'd touched, I realized something. Healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about building something good from the wreckage. 18 months after the funeral, Mom and I took a drive to Estes Park. It was a Saturday in late June, the kind of day when the Colorado sky stretched wide and cloudless, and the mountains looked close enough to touch. We hadn't planned it, not really. But that morning over coffee on Mom's balcony, she'd said, "I think it's time we went back." I knew what she meant. We packed a simple lunch, climbed into my car, and drove west out of Denver. The highway wound through foothills and pine forests, past towns I'd known my whole life, but had barely thought about in months. And as the road climbed higher, I felt something shift inside me, a loosening, a letting go. We were going back to the place where it all began, to the river. The Big Thompson River cuts through Estes Park like a ribbon of memory. We parked near the trailhead where my family used to hike when Natalie and I were kids. The cabin Mom and Dad had built, sold now to strangers, was somewhere upstream out of sight. I was grateful for that. We walked down to the riverbank in silence, our shoes crunching on gravel and dirt. The water was high with snowmelt rushing over rocks, glinting in the sunlight. The sound of it, steady, relentless, alive, filled the air. This was the place where 23 years ago I had slipped on a wet rock and fallen into the current. The place where the water had pulled me under cold and merciless, The place where my sister, 13 years old, terrified brave, had jumped in after me and dragged me to shore. The place where Natalie had become my hero. I stood at the edge of the water, staring at the rushing current, and felt tears prick my eyes. "This is where she saved me," I said quietly. Mom stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "I know," she said. I swallowed hard. I've spent so much time hating her, so much time angry at what she did, what she took from us. But I can't forget what she did here. I can't forget that she risked her life for me. Mom didn't say anything. She just listened. She was my hero. I continued, my voice breaking. And then she became something else, someone I didn't recognize. And I don't know how to hold both of those versions of her in my head at the same time. I turned to look at Mom, tears streaming down my face now. How do you do it? How do you love someone who hurt you that much? Mom was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the water. "I don't know if I have a good answer," she said finally, "but I'll tell you what I've learned. Love doesn't excuse betrayal. It doesn't make what she did okay, but it also doesn't just disappear." She turned to me, her eyes soft and sad. "Natalie is still my daughter. She made terrible choices. She hurt us in ways I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from, but she's still my daughter. And I still love her." Her voice wavered. "That doesn't mean I trust her. It doesn't mean I've forgiven her, not completely. But it means I can't just turn off what I feel. I can't erase the years before all of this. The little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. The teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The woman who jumped into that river to save you." She looked back at the water. "She's all of those people. And she's the person who stole from me. She's both. And I have to find a way to live with that." I took a shaky breath. "Do you visit her?" Mom nodded. "Once a month. I started going about 6 months after the sentencing." I stared at her. "You never told me." "I didn't want to pressure you," she said gently. "I didn't want you to feel like you had to go or that you were doing something wrong by not going. This is your journey, Rebecca, not mine." I looked down at my hands. "What's she like when you see her?" Mom considered the question. "Different. Quieter. She doesn't make excuses anymore. She's going to therapy. Real therapy with a counselor who specializes in addiction and financial crimes. She started to understand why she did what she did. The jealousy, the desperation, the way she let Volkov's debt consume her. Does she ask about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom nodded. "Every time. She asks if you're okay, if you're happy, if you hate her." "And what do you tell her?" "I tell her the truth," Mom said. "That you're healing, that you're building a life, and that I don't know if you'll ever be ready to see her, but that I hope someday you might be." I turned back to the river, watching the water rush past. It was the same river that had almost killed me when I was 8 years old. The same river where Natalie had proven herself capable of extraordinary courage. And now, standing here 18 months after everything had fallen apart, it was something else. A symbol. The river didn't stop moving. It didn't hold grudges or cling to the past. It just flowed relentless, constant, always moving forward. Time was like that, I realized. Healing was like that. The water that had once been dangerous, that had pulled me under and stolen my breath, was also cleansing, renewing. It carried away the debris, the broken branches, the things that didn't belong. Maybe forgiveness was like that too. Not forgetting, not excusing, but letting go. Letting the current carry some of the weight downstream. I wasn't there yet. I didn't know if I'd ever be. But standing here beside my mother, listening to the river rush past, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. "I think I'm going to write to her," I said suddenly. Mom looked at me surprised. "You are—" I nodded. "Not because I forgive her. I'm not ready for that, but because I need her to know that I remember. I remember the river. I remember the scar on her arm. I remember that she was my hero before she was anything else. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I think that would mean a lot to her. I'm not ready to visit, I said quickly. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that, but I can write. I can acknowledge that she's still a person, that she's still my sister. Mom pulled me into a hug and I let myself cry into her shoulder. Not the broken, desperate sobs of grief, but something softer, something like release. As we turned to leave, Mom squeezed my hand. You know, she said, her voice steady and sure, family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. I looked at her, this woman who had orchestrated an entire fake funeral to expose the truth, who had started a foundation to protect strangers, who visited her daughter in prison even after everything. You showed up, Mom, I said. You've always shown up. She smiled. So have you. 2 years to the day after the phone call that changed everything, I woke up to snow falling over Denver. I stood at the window of my Cherry Creek townhouse, the same townhouse I'd shared with Ryan, now fully mine after buying out his share, and watched the city turn white. January 12th, 2026. 2 years since Natalie had called to tell me my mother was dead. 2 years since the lie that had unraveled everything. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table watching the snow fall and thought about how much had changed. I was 32 years old, single and content. I'd been dating someone, Marcus, a high school history teacher I'd met at one of the fund's community workshops 6 months ago. He was kind, patient, and had no interest in rushing anything. We took walks. We went to movies. We cooked dinner together on weekends. It wasn't a grand romance, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to let someone in. I worked full-time for the Dorothy Mitchell Elder Protection Fund now. I'd officially left my graphic design career behind, though I still use those skills every day, creating materials, managing the website, designing campaigns. But now, instead of selling products, I was helping save lives, and it felt right. The townhouse was mine, fully legally mine. After the divorce was finalized, I'd taken out a loan to buy out Ryan's half. It had been worth it. This was my home, my sanctuary, the place where I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up. Mom was thriving. At 65, she was healthier and more active than she'd been in years. She volunteered at the fund 3 times a week, answering phones, meeting with clients, sharing her story at workshops. People loved her. She had a way of making even the most frightened, vulnerable person feel seen and heard. And she was dating Thomas Garrett. I'd suspected it for months before she finally told me. They'd been working together closely since the fund's inception, and somewhere along the way, their partnership had shifted into something more. I was happy for her. Thomas was a good man, and Mom deserved happiness. Natalie was in her 2nd year of a 7-year sentence. According to Mom, who still visited her once a month, she was doing well. She'd been a model inmate quiet cooperative, attending therapy sessions and educational programs. She'd earned privileges. She'd started painting again, something she used to do when we were kids. And she and I had started exchanging letters. It had started slowly. I'd written to her last summer after the trip to the river. Just a short note. Nothing profound. Just acknowledgement. She'd written back, and then I'd written again. And slowly, carefully, we were building something. Not trust, not yet, but connection. In her last letter, she'd written something that had stayed with me. I'm learning that the person I was doesn't have to be the person I become. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready to visit her. I didn't know if we'd ever have a real relationship again. But I was beginning to believe that people could change, that redemption, however incomplete, was possible. The fund had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. In 2 years, we'd helped more than 500 elderly individuals navigate cases of financial abuse. We'd recovered over $5 million in stolen assets. We'd expanded to 4 additional offices across Colorado. We'd trained hundreds of volunteers. And we'd lobbied successfully for legislative change. In November of 2025, Colorado governor signed the Dorothy Mitchell Act into law. It established stricter oversight for power of attorney designations, mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions, and harsher penalties for elder financial abuse. Mom had cried when the governor handed her the pen he'd used to sign the bill. "This is your legacy," I'd told her. "No," she'd said, squeezing my hand. This is ours. Yeah, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee warming my hands, and thought about family. 2 years ago, I thought my family had been destroyed. I thought betrayal was the end of the story, but I'd learned something since then. Family isn't just the people you're born with. It's the people who choose to stay, the people who fight for you, the people who tell you the truth even when it hurts, the people who show up when you need them most. Mom was family. Thomas was family. Jennifer and the team at the fund were family. Even Marcus, tentative and new as he was, felt like he could be family. And maybe Natalie could be again someday. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen, the fund's main line. I smiled and answered. Dorothy Mitchell Elder Protection Fund, this is Rebecca. How can I help you? There was a pause. Then a voice, elderly, trembling, scared. My daughter is stealing from me, the woman said. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to call. I took a deep breath and felt that familiar sense of purpose settle over me. You called the right place, I said gently. Let's start with your story. I listened as the woman on the other end of the line began to speak. On my desk sat a framed photograph, Mom and me standing by the big Thompson River, smiling. On the wall behind me was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 2022, Teen Hero Saves Sister from Drowning, a reminder of who Natalie had been. And beside it, a newer article, Elder Protection Fund Changes Lives Across Colorado, a reminder of who I had become. I took notes, I asked questions, I offered reassurance. And as the snow continued to fall outside my window, I realized something. Some stories don't have fairy tale endings. They don't wrap up neatly with villains punished and heroes rewarded and everything returning to the way it was before. But they can have meaningful endings. They can have endings where broken people find a way to heal, where pain becomes purpose, where families are redefined, where the wreckage is rebuilt into something new, something stronger, something truer. And sometimes that's enough. Looking back on everything that happened, I want to share what I've learned, so you don't have to walk the path I did. Don't ignore the signs. When someone you love starts acting secretive, trust your instincts. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself, it hides behind excuses and deflection. Don't dismiss your gut feeling just because you're told you're overreacting. Don't let family betrayal consume you with thoughts of family revenge. Yes, the people closest to me chose greed over love, but through God's grace, I found the strength to rebuild. When I felt most broken, God reminded me that healing is possible even from family betrayal this deep. And when I wanted family revenge, God showed me a better path, turning pain into purpose. Protect your loved ones. If you suspect elder financial abuse, act immediately. Talk to a lawyer. Document everything. Don't wait until it's too late. Trust God's timing. My mother orchestrated a plan that required incredible patience and faith. She trusted God to reveal the truth at the right moment. And He did. If you take one thing from my story, let it be. This family betrayal is devastating, but seeking family revenge only destroys you further. Instead, choose justice. Choose healing. Choose purpose. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Please like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Final note. This content contains dramatized elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the core lessons about recognizing financial and emotional abuse are real. If this style isn't for you, that's okay. Please seek content that better fits your needs.